Welcome back to the Ross Bolen podcast. I am your host, Ross Bolen, and today I will be joined by a special guest, filmmaker, documentarian, producer, and director Bradley Jackson. His latest project, Facing Nolan, the definitive documentary about Hall of Fame pitcher Nolan Ryan, had its world premiere earlier this year at South by Southwest here in Austin, Texas, has since been acquired and will screen nationwide in theaters one night only later this month on May 24th. For those of you who love baseball, this is a fascinating look into one of the most legendary pitchers in the history of the game. And for those of you who couldn't care less about baseball, it's a unique look into the world of documentary filmmaking and how a project like this comes together. So let's bring Bradley into the studio and get started. But first, today's episode of RBP is brought to you by Liquid IV. It is hot, very, very hot in Texas in the summer, and as such, before I work out, or sometimes even before or after I podcast, I make sure and crush a Liquid IV so that I stay hydrated, because when you push your body too hard or just feel run down, it is extremely important to stay hydrated. Making hydration a priority helps us feel better on a day-to-day basis, and one stick of Liquid IV Hydration Multiplier in 16 ounces of water hydrates you 2 times faster and more efficiently than water alone. Liquid IV Hydration comes in refreshing flavors like watermelon, lemon lime, strawberry, piña colada, and more. It contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C, with 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. Made with premium ingredients, non-GMO, and free from gluten, dairy, and soy. And what makes it so effective? The science of cellular transport technology, otherwise known as CTT, designed to enhance rapid absorption of water and other key ingredients into the bloodstream. Also, Liquid IV is on a mission to change the world. They've donated over 20 million servings globally. Grab Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco, or you can get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use code ROSS at checkout. That's 25% off anything you order when you use promo code ROSS, R-O-S-S, at liquidiv.com. Experience better hydration today at liquidiv.com, promo code ROSS. Now I am joined by documentarian and director Bradley Jackson. Bradley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Ross. Happy to be here.
Facing Nolan, the documentary about Hall of Fame pitcher Nolan Ryan, premiered earlier this year at South by Southwest here in Austin. I was lucky enough to catch an invite, much appreciate. And Mr. Bradley Jackson here wrote and directed the documentary. It is the first film that spans the 75-year-old Nolan Ryan's life, from his modest childhood, growing up, through his days playing for the Mets, Angels, Astros, and the Rangers. How did you decide, Facing Nolan Ryan, that this was going to be the next documentary you really wanted to go after and do?
So I feel like a lot of great projects, it was birthed out of a little bit of professional jealousy. I had just rewatched The Last Dance for the second time. So, I've spent 20 hours of my life watching a Michael Jordan documentary, just seething with jealousy. Like, why couldn't I have made that movie? I want to make that movie. And I'm driving from Texas back to Los Angeles. This is during in the middle of the pandemic. And I'm just by myself in the car, just thinking, seething with jealousy. And I was like, well, who's my Michael Jordan?
Who's your equivalent? Yeah.
Who's my equivalent of Michael Jordan? And I'm like, well, I'm from Texas. I'm from Houston. And of course, and I love the Astros. And it's got to be Nolan Ryan.
Yeah, I had to wear the throwback Nolan Ryan jersey today.
Yeah.
And it's like $400 or whatever. I've had it in my closet for years, and I figure what better opportunity. You're a Houston guy.
Houston guy.
What high school did you go to?
Second Baptist High School.
Second Baptist, man, which is ironically where I grew up going to church, and where my mom used to work when I was a kid.
That's right.
Our mothers actually know each other, which is how we got introduced.
Shout out to Audrey and Debbie.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And you're living in LA now?
Yes.
How's that?
LA, it's actually pretty cool. I've
only been a couple times.
Yeah, no, it's East LA. I live East LA, which is not LA. Like, people don't know about Glendale or Glassell Park or Mount Washington or Eagle Rock, and it's very much like Austin 10 years ago, it feels like.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, I don't ever see the Hollywood sign. I don't ever walk down the Walk of Fame or whatever it is.
None of the touristy shit.
None of the touristy stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So once you decided Nolan was your next thing you were going to go after, how long did it take from the inception of the idea to the screening that I got to see in South by? Like, how much time was that? How much time passed?
Really, pretty much from the moment I came up with the idea to the moment we screened it, it was probably 19 to 20 months, which is very fast.
That is a lot quicker than I would have imagined.
Yeah, I mean, Nolan Ryan threw the fastest fastball of all time. It makes sense that his documentary comes together in record speed. But no, it just like it all clicked. I had the idea. I pitched it to a couple of different people that I've worked with, and they were all just like, "Oh yeah, why hasn't anybody thought about this?" And the answer is a lot of people have thought about it. I think it was timing meets preparation,
Right?
And we had made a bunch of documentaries up to that point that had achieved certain levels of success. Never like gigantic breakthrough, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, Searching for Sugar Man documentary success, but like respectable, like people knew who we were. And we were able to get into the Ryan family. I created like a big pitch deck of like, this is my vision for the movie. This is how I want to tell it. And the title was Facing Nolan. It was like what you see on screen is what I was kind of dreaming for the most part. And
which is oftentimes not the case.
No, exactly. And pretty much my producer, Russell Groves, his dad knew Bobby Witt.
Okay.
Not to be confused with Bobby Witt Jr., his son, who is the phenomenal rookie sensation on the Kansas City Royals right now.
Right.
But Bobby Witt Sr. Was a really amazing MLB pitcher in the early 90s. So he pitched with Nolan. And my producer's father used to do his plumbing.
Okay.
And so literally like it's like, well, cool, I'll text Bobby and see if I can get you in with the Ryan family. And then like 20 minutes later, I'm like, we get a text being like, cool, I forwarded your information to Reese Ryan, who is Nolan's middle child.
Right.
And then all of a sudden my producer's on the phone with Reese, and Reese is like, you know what? This is interesting. We sent him the creative deck. And then like we didn't hear anything for a couple weeks, and all of a sudden I get a call from my producer being like, can you be on a plane to Austin next week? We're going to go to the Round Rock Express Stadium and pitch to the Ryan family.
Which Nolan owns the Round Rock Express, correct?
Yeah. Nolan owns pretty much every chunk of land from like the Round Rock Express for like 5 miles. It's good to be Nolan Ryan.
Yes.
And so we flew down, we pitched to Reed Ryan, Reese Ryan, and Ruth Ryan.
Before you ever got the pitch to Nolan?
Yeah, we never met. We met Nolan after we did the pitch. And I think that was intentional because, and he said this in interviews, his son has said this in interviews, but Nolan didn't want to do it.
Yeah, so he's not, like when you watch the documentary, you definitely get this impression that he is not one of these dudes who's after celebrity and he does not give a shit about pop culture. I've been watching Winning Time on HBO, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because when Larry Bird, the guy who's playing Larry Bird, portraying Larry Bird on screen, comes on, he gives me sort of the same vibes that Nolan Ryan does. Is a dude that was about getting his job done, taking care of his family. He doesn't necessarily like all of the attention and that's the reason you haven't seen this done before you were able to pull it off. Right. So they obviously trusted you to a degree. Yeah. And your vision.
Yeah, I think the pitch was good. I think the fact that we had made some documentaries that had similar kind of vibes about, people from Texas and also sports related stuff.
Right. You did action for, I believe it was Showtime.
For Showtime.
A few years back. We talked about that on our show.
We did a documentary called Dealt, which is about the world's greatest card magician who's also blind.
You told me about this.
It's the craziest story, and that guy's from Texas, and it's very Texas-y kind of machismo kind of vibe. And so it was very much so essentially what we were told a couple of months later as we were filming was like, Nolan still didn't want to do it, and then Ruth Ryan, who, if you watch the film, is like, she steals the show. She's like the most incredible person in the world. Ruth Ryan more or less said, hey, Nolan, you're doing this, and you're doing it for me because I know how amazing your story is. I lived it.
Right.
I am a part of it. And your story wouldn't be this amazing without me and your family. And so you're doing this for us.
Right.
And you're doing it for your grandkids. And so Nolan, I think they Reed likes to say they kind of slow played him. They said like, oh yeah, one interview, maybe 2 to 3 hours long, and that's all you have to do. They're going to interview just all the people you pitched against, you played with. And at first that's how it went, but then he kind of liked it. I think he liked us. I think he liked, I'm from Houston. My producer Russell's from the kind of Dallas-Fort Worth area. Russell's a big rancher. He owns, his family owns like a ranch, and they've owned it for like 100 years. I went to the same high school that Nolan's grandkids went to. All these things we didn't know until we started making it. So I think he started to like enjoy us being around. And he's very funny. Like, we found out one of his favorite movies is Dumb and Dumber.
No way.
One of Nolan Ryan's favorite movies is Dumb and Dumber.
Oh, that makes me very, very happy, as it is like a top 3 comedy for me of all time. I grew up on that movie.
Number one. And a quick side story. So this is one of those pinch me moments. I'm sitting in the Astrodome, which looks like a haunted graveyard right now.
Yeah, that's for those of you who don't know this, it's the stadium that the Astros played in when Bradley and I were growing up.
Yes.
At one point, they had planned to demolish it. It is right next to now what is Reliant.
Yeah.
And where the Texans play, and they never demolished it, and it's just kind of this giant rat infested. Like, I don't even know what's going on in
right, there. Exactly. But you can still, if you position and you'll see in the film, you can still position your camera in a way where it looks like you're in the Astrodome. So we interviewed Craig Biggio up there.
Right.
And so I'm like hunched down in the corner talking to Craig Biggio, one of our investors who's like one of Nolan's like dear friends is there watching, and we're in between setups, and the investor goes, "Hey, what do you think Nolan's favorite movie is?" And I'm like, is it Lonesome Dove? Is it a John Wayne Western? Tombstone. And he goes, "No, it's Dumb and Dumber." And I mean, my brain exploded. Like Craig Biggio, who's my other sports hero, in the Astrodome, and I found out that my other hero that I'm making a movie about, his favorite movie, is my favorite movie.
Which you never would have guessed. If you've ever watched an interview with Nolan Ryan in any capacity, you would not guess Dumb and Dumber is his favorite film.
Right. Well, I asked him about it. We thought about trying to include it in the movie, but it made no sense. I asked him about it. He goes, "Well, it's not my favorite movie, but I do think it's really, really funny." So I don't think he wanted to admit on camera that it was his favorite movie.
That's fair.
Yeah. Anyway, so
a little bit with his reputation.
Yeah, a little bit of a sidetrack there. Yeah. Where were we?
We're talking about Ruth Ryan, actually. Yeah. So that's one of the things that obviously, having seen the documentary, was really kind of surprising to me. I did not know much about Nolan's family, right? Like you, I grew up with Nolan Ryan as sort of this godlike figure, and I was a pitcher as a little kid, and you know, throwing a fastball was definitely it was my best pitch in my arsenal, and anybody who's a fastball pitcher, Nolan Ryan is a god.
Yeah.
And because he spent time on the Astros and obviously then the Rangers, I'd been seeing him my whole life, but I did not know anything about his personal story.
Right.
His family.
Right.
And Ruth Ryan, like you said, she shines through as kind of almost like the driving force behind his career, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, Nolan was obviously very motivated and very disciplined and very talented, but I think that's what really made me realize we had an interesting movie that was going to surprise certain parts of it were going to surprise people when we're pitching the movie to the Ryan family, and it's Ruth and Reed and Reese. And Ruth starts talking to me about how Nolan, when he was on the Mets, he would be reading books about banking and cattle on the bus in between games. And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, like he thought he was going to maybe play for like 5 years." And obviously he played for 27 years.
Which is still
mind-boggling. And I was like, "Wait, what do you mean?" He's like, "Oh yeah, like Nolan he had no plans to be a lifelong baseball player. It was never in his thought process. I think he just thought like, oh," and like we talk about it a little bit in the movie, his first contract was for $7,000.
Right.
Which like that's what Carlos Correa makes in one pitch. Right. And so pretty much like he I think, and also, by the way, $7,000 was more than his dad made in a year.
So at that point, like he was looking at it like, this is a very small amount of money. I'm getting screwed here.
It was genuinely like, oh, $7,000 to go play baseball? This is amazing.
Right.
And so he said yes, and he was drafted on the Mets draft that year. They drafted 12 other players before they drafted Nolan Ryan. And unfortunately, we had to cut this scene because it takes too long to explain. But we list out, there's this amazing sports writer named Joe Pesnanski, and he wrote this article for The Athletic about where he essentially listed the 12 other players who were drafted on the Mets before Nolan Ryan.
Right.
And he lists out their career. I think 10 of the 12 never made it to the major leagues. One of them played 14 games in the major leagues, and then one of them had an 11-year career.
And how many games did Nolan end up playing?
I don't know how many he played.
An insane amount of games.
Yeah. Well, and it's obviously different because the pitcher doesn't play as many games as Cal Ripken Jr.
For sure.
But I mean, he was on a 4-day rotation too, which is like, if you know anything about baseball, they got rid of 4-day rotations.
And that's
15 years ago, yeah.
One of the really shocking things as a baseball fan, present day, watching the documentary is you get a feel for just how much the sport has changed since Nolan Ryan started pitching, right? Yeah. When these guys were going, I mean, it was not a big deal to hear about a pitcher pitching a complete game back in the day. Whereas now, I mean, they're all about arm rest and trying to preserve these guys for as long as possible, which makes everything he did even more freakish because he was out there throwing 9 innings pretty regularly, just getting insanely high pitch counts. And really, I mean, like we said, the guy's throwing heat.
Oh, yeah. He gets better as he goes along, too. He's one of those guys that, like, if he's going to have trouble, it might be in the first inning.
Right.
But if he can get through that first inning and get through unscathed, and he's got 1 to 2 of his pitches kind of in the sweet spot, it's on. And
one of the things you brought up in the documentary was that there were several, I mean, you interview all number of people: Craig Biggio, George Brett, Rod Carew, Cal Ripken Jr., Roger Clemens, Tom Grieve, Tom House, Randy Johnson, Pete Rose, Ivan Rodriguez, Bobby Valentine, and then President George W. Bush. Right. But it comes up that a lot of these dudes believed Nolan was touching speeds way higher than they were like really able to measure with their radar guns at that point.
Yeah.
Like guys were claiming 103, 104.
Yeah, that was a moment that was really a pinch me moment because we're talking to his catcher from the Mets. So Nolan won the World Series with the Miracle Mets in 1969, and he was a relief pitcher, which is a surprising fact for a lot of people too. Like,
very much so.
But he really he got a key save. Both in the World Series and the pennant race championship.
He was one of the heroes of the series.
He really was. And his catcher, Jerry Grody, who is a Texas local as well, was more or less saying, like, I caught the other pitchers on that team. I caught Tom Seaver, a Hall of Famer. I caught Jerry Kuzman, a legendary pitcher as well. It's like those guys were throwing fast. But when Nolan threw, I had to adjust where I held my glove. I had to adjust how I positioned my legs.
Had to give himself a little bit more power in his position there.
And he says, and he goes, he was throwing 105, 106, 107, 108. Which is just mind-boggling. Yeah. And then when they actually did the world famous speed test on him, which was in 1974, the radar technology hadn't been invented until then, or where they measured the speed of a fastball. They were measuring the ball 10 feet from a release point. And at that point, it was 101 miles per hour, or 100.9, which was the fastest anybody had been measured ever. But when you actually measure it from release point, which is how they do it now.
Right.
108 miles an hour.
Which is unheard of.
Unheard of. I think Aroldis
basically unhittable.
Yeah. Aroldis Chapman throws 105 at his like insane prime.
Fuck that guy.
I know, right? I still watch the Altuve home run every now and then when I can't fall asleep.
Yeah, that gets a smile on my face real quick.
Exactly. Anyways, so he just was regularly touching hundreds, no problem, especially in those Angels years.
Yeah, that catcher speaking to how he had a little bit more pop in his glove when Nolan's pitches came in.
Yeah.
Hurt his hand.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
That really tells you everything you need to know. So when you went into this and you're doing, I mean, obviously you knew a lot about Nolan, not so much probably about his personal life and his family. Did you know that Ruth and their story, Ruth and Nolan's story, would kind of become the focal point, or one of the focal points, I should say, or did that kind of happen along the way? Was it something you discovered?
That definitely surprised me. I mean, I knew we wanted to talk about his family, and just because I think that's obviously an interesting aspect of any athlete's career, especially, a super famous major league athlete being with the same woman from the age of 16 years old to now 75.
Yeah, their story's wild.
That's amazing in and of itself. But I think just hearing about how Ruth wasn't what you might consider traditional baseball wife.
Right.
She was obsessed with baseball, and obsessed with sports. She loves competition. She's they talk about how she is actually the most competitive person in that family.
Right. Over Nolan. Yeah.
Over Nolan. She would want to, after every single game Nolan pitched, she would want to relitigate the game with him. And he would be, if you know Nolan, he's just like very much like, no, that happened. I'm done. I don't want to think about it anymore.
I move forward. Yeah.
Yeah. But she was just like, well, like there's a great story about how Nolan should actually technically have 8 no-hitters. There was one game, so they changed the rules where like an infield error used to be a hit, and now an infield error is an error and doesn't count against the pitcher.
Right.
But in the early 70s, it was a hit. So if there's an error in the infield, they would just go, oh, that's a hit. He gave up an infield error to the Yankees. It was like a pop fly, miscommunication between second base and shortstop. Ball drops in the middle. Guy gets to first. This happens in the first inning, and then Nolan throws a no-hitter after that.
Damn.
And so like Ruth brings that up to me, and I'm like, oh, so he should have 8 no-hitters. And she's like, yes, I've been saying that for years. He should have 8. And I'm like,
she's like appealing the league.
Yeah, honestly, it feels like she probably would if she could. But anyways, yeah, that when we started seeing that aspect of the story. And Reed Ryan said it best to me as we were kind of halfway through making the movie. He's like, I've always seen this as a love story wrapped in baseball.
Which is very much how it plays out when you're, I mean, it's like, it's cool because typically, watching The Last Dance as an example, I mean, you're not getting into Michael Jordan's love life or really his personal life at all. It's all about what he did on the court, right?
Right.
Which is cool. It's interesting, and when it's an all-time great in any sport, there's a lot to talk about still.
Right.
But you miss the element of like, so what was this dude's life like outside of basketball?
Right.
How did he keep it together? Who were the people driving him? Like, what was the story?
Right.
And that's what I love so much about Facing Nolan is that you get to know the man.
Right.
Like you walk away from watching it with a feel for like his heart,
right?
Not just his pitching prowess, right?
Right.
Who he is as a family man, and that was really, really, I mean, it was impactful.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think very early on in the process, his son Reed was like, "Hey, so what's going to be our like conflict in this movie?" Because my dad didn't have any scandals. He didn't have any, mortal enemies. He didn't have a drug problem. He never got arrested. He never got arrested. Yeah. I mean, the worst thing he did, which was just beat up Robin Ventura, is widely seen as amazing.
Yeah, well, it was amazing.
It was amazing, and it wasn't. Nobody can blame him.
It serves as one of the crescendos of the documentary, and I mean, everybody who knows Nolan Ryan knew that was coming at some point.
Of course,
right? The way you played it out was beautiful, though.
Thank you. And to me, like, the first day on set, I was actually thinking, I was like, oh yeah, he doesn't have a gambling addiction like Michael Jordan, or he's not even a jerk to his teammates like Jordan was.
Beating the shit out of teammates at practice.
Right, yeah. He didn't punch Steve Kerr in a practice. And I was like, well, you know what? This isn't, first of all, like, I'm okay with, like, I feel like we're in a day and age where, like, all of our hero athletes have let us down a little bit. And
sure.
Being from Houston, I mean, the Deshaun Watson thing broke my heart. Like, I was just like, oh my goodness.
It was brutal, man. We waited how many years? 15 years to get a quarterback that could legitimately give us a chance at a Super Bowl, and just like that, it was gone.
It was gone. And so, I mean, I feel like whether it's Lance Armstrong or Michael Jordan or all these guys where you're like, you idolize them and then you find out they're
flawed.
They're flawed and they're human. And not to say that Nolan isn't flawed, but like, he doesn't have that like major like, oh, yeeks.
Ooh, really messed up.
Yeah. And so I was like, this is a tall tale. In my mind, I wanted to treat this like an actual tall tale. And somebody who wrote a review for it more or less said, like, if you pitched this as a screenplay without him having been in existence, if Nolan Ryan never existed, and you turn it into a screenplay and go, I want to write a movie about a guy who's a pitcher, he comes out of nowhere, he breaks every single record, he runs a fully functioning cattle ranch, he stays with his high school sweetheart for 50 plus years, he's got a great family who loves him, and maybe the only bad thing he did was beat up a young guy who deserved it. And you'd be like, dude, get out. That doesn't sound like a good movie. Like that. First of all, that's not realistic at all. That could never happen. And then, but no, it does happen. And I think it's just like, let's not try and hide the fact that Nolan is a good guy and that he is larger than life, but he's also a human being.
Right. There's no reason to force controversy where there isn't any.
No.
The only moment I think in the entire documentary where you kind of go, wait, what was that? What? Yeah. Is when that woman sprints onto the field topless or whatever, and he drops... Not topless, sorry.
No, yeah, I'll tell you about that. That's funny. Yeah, we got a little bit of someone, like, a few people have brought that up, be like, what was that? It's like, so that was an iconic super fan of the Astros, I think. I think her name was Morgana the Kissing Bandit, I think.
Right.
And that was her shtick. She would run onto the field and like kiss a player. And I think like we were interviewing Phil Garner, the legendary Phil Garner, who used to coach. He's head coach for the Astros when they went to their first World Series in 2000 something or another. And he was like, "Oh yeah, we all had a thing for Morgana. Nolan was the only one that didn't want to, whatever with her." And then we found the video, and I was just like, "That's a funny. Let's throw it in there."
It's a great moment.
It is a great moment. Yeah.
Especially with the backstory of it being a super fan, that was what she was like. That was her thing. That was her shtick.
Yeah.
So out of all the people that you ended up getting access to for this documentary, were most of those people relationships that you formed through the Ryan family? Were they like, here's the people we still have connections with, here are the guys that we think would provide you with good context and answers to your questions?
Yeah, pretty much everybody that's a player in the league we got through the Ryan family. They essentially opened up their Rolodex to us and said, incredible. Here you go. One of our executive producers is a guy named David Check. He worked on Action. He was the showrunner for the Action series we did for Showtime. He also used to run Major League Baseball films for 17 years.
Well, that's helpful.
And he's a great guy. He's awesome. And he had a lot of contacts too. So he could sometimes like they couldn't. I don't think the Ryan family had like a direct contact to Rod Carew, even though they play like Nolan and Rod played together on the Angels for a year or two. And so like Dave would be like, okay, I can find Rod Carew's information, or I can find Randy Johnson's information. So we took a little bit of strain off the Ryan family, but for the most part, it was like, I mean, obviously George W. Bush. We don't get that interview without, Nolan being like, "Hey, George, you want to talk about me for 30 minutes?" And George being like, "All right, cool."
Well, I think the amount of legendary baseball players and just people in general that you end up seeing in the documentary speaking about Nolan says a lot about him too, right?
Right.
And that just gives you context to how many people this guy is a legend.
Yeah, when you play
eyes.
for 27 years, I think somebody put a tweet out recently that said like Nolan Ryan had like a 2.6 ERA when the Beatles' White Album was the #1 record in the country, and he had a 2.3 ERA when Nirvana's Nevermind was the top album in the
Which
country.
is one of the really things about him that cemented this, legendary status. He got better as he was older. Like he really, and you nail that part of it in the documentary. That's not a thing that really happens with pitchers, man. Yeah. Like you get worn down, your arm gets weaker,
especially when you're a power pitcher.
Yes, especially
maybe if you're like a Greg Maddux or even a Zach Greinke who can kind of like you can figure out how to like spin the ball different. I mean, Nolan,
switch up your game.
Switch up your game. And Nolan definitely switched up his game a little bit.
For sure.
That was what was really fun to learn when he went to the Rangers is he had this pitching coach named Tom House. And if you look up Tom House, this guy, I want to make a documentary about Tom House. He is a legend, but he's this behind the scenes legend. He pitched for the Braves for a little bit, I think. And he's pseudo famous as well for catching Mickey Mantle's. He was in the dugout and caught Hank Aaron's game-breaking home run, the 714 or whatever.
Oh, he was in the bullpen?
He was in the bullpen and he caught it. And there's this great picture where he's like handing it to Hank Aaron. But he's known as like the mad scientist of throwing. And he
a pitcher whisperer,
pretty much, exactly, or just a throwing whisperer because so
not even just the pitchers,
no quarterbacks. He actually that's when his career got wild. So first of all, he was the pitching coach for the Rangers, and he was like the first guy. Look him up, Dr. Tom House. He's amazing. He's got a great Twitter presence. He was the first guy to really be like, hey, there's some science, there's kinesiology, there's science going on in what these guys are doing. So he would like put the little computer balls all over Nolan's body and put them in front of a green screen and measure out his throw and be like, okay, your release point needs to come 0.3 seconds early or whatever it is, and your shoulder angle needs to be like this instead of like this because your release point's here, and then to
generate as much power and accuracy as possible.
Exactly. And Nolan, you would think, being like this old school Texas guy, would be like, nope, I'm not changing up my thing.
Go fuck yourself, science.
Exactly. Nolan is the exact opposite. Like Tom House calls him a hillbilly genius. He goes, Nolan Ryan is a hillbilly genius in that he is all about finding the most innovative way to become the best that he is. Like pitchers were not lifting in the 70s and 80s. Pitchers were not lifting weights, which is crazy. Like, damn. And Nolan was the only guy who'd be like, when I lift weights, I play better. And he would sneak into the gym. His trainers, I think for the Angels, were like, you can't lift weights. And he'll be like, cool, yeah, I won't. And then he like sneak into the weight room and just like get some reps in and then like throw 190 pitches and be fine. So Nolan is very cutting edge when it comes to understanding how technology and science and training can help his body. And then, so Dr. Tom House also, they changed Randy Johnson's career. Dr. Tom House changed Tom Brady's career. He changed Drew Brees' career. If you go into his office in San Diego, he has the cleats that Drew Brees wore for one of his last games in the regular season 2 years ago, and they're Nolan Ryan's bloody lip on the cleats because Drew Brees is like obsessed with Nolan Ryan, and Dr. Tom House like changed his career. It's this cool like
That's
symmetry
an awesome
of
connection.
like, yeah, essentially if you're somebody who's trying to throw for a living and you're like late 30s, early 40s, Tom House works with you.
Yeah, he's the guy who keeps you going, gets you sharper, get your game where you need it to be.
Exactly.
So who out of all the people you talked to, was there anybody that was a real surprise in terms of the, athletes or former presidents?
The biggest surprise to me was Randy Johnson. I think because I thought it was going to be a tough interview, just because I think you think of Randy Johnson as 6'11", intimidating, bird killing.
He's a hard ass.
Yeah. And he kind of is, but he also was so giddy to talk about.
He was, man, it was really surprising to see how happy a lot of these guys were.
Yeah.
Not just that they gave you the time.
Yeah.
They gave you the time and they were stoked to get to speak on Nolan.
Yes.
And it was almost like they recognized the way that you did and everybody that helped you put the project together. This had never been done and needed to be done. That this is a guy whose story needed to be told, and they were stoked to be a part of that.
Yeah, yeah. And, Randy Johnson, I think one of the first questions I asked is just to kind of get people warmed up, who is Nolan Ryan to the art of pitching? And then Randy Johnson just launches into this soliloquy about how Nolan is he's like Picasso or he's like Mozart, and how his fastballs are like brush strokes. And I was like, oh my goodness, Randy.
So deep.
So deep. And he just and then Randy, he would say things there's a line in the movie where he goes, I asked him about the strikeout record that Nolan has. And he goes, oh, his strikeout record? Yeah. I'm number 2 on the all-time list of strikeouts, and Nolan is number 1, and Nolan has 1,000 more strikeouts than I do.
He's not close, is his point.
Yeah. He's I would have had to have pitched for 6 more years to have tied Nolan Ryan. And I retired when I was 43.
I was going to say, it's not like Randy retired young. That man went deep into his early 40s, I think.
Yeah,
too.
I think he was 42 or 43 when he retired. So it's just the reverence these guys have for Nolan is second to none.
The other interviewee that really stood out to me as holy shit, this guy loves Nolan Ryan was George Brett.
Yeah.
I mean, he provided a lot of spark in the documentary in terms of he brought his whole A game with the personality and the stories and it was awesome.
He's got a twinkle in his eye, that guy.
Yeah, he does.
And and what's interesting is he doesn't actually know Nolan very well. They just faced each other so often.
Is it just a respect thing?
It's a respect thing, and I think it's an intimidate. I genuinely think George Brett still is a little intimidated by Nolan Ryan.
That's fair.
And I wish we could have included this in the documentary as well. But George Brett walked me through pitch by pitch an at bat he had against Nolan that he's still mad about. He was more or less just
Still carries it with him.
Yeah, he's like his bases loaded, top of the ninth. It's 2-1. We're losing. I'm up to bat. There's one out. So I think there's no way I'm not at least tying this game. And Nolan gets me in a 2-2 count. And then he throws this like weird change-up slider thing that I didn't see coming, and I topped it, went to third base. Third baseman throws the guy out at home plate, throws me out at first, double play, game over. I'm still mad about it.
Oof.
And I'm just like, dude, you're 65 years old. How are you like still remembering this stuff?
So as a documentarian, and talking about all the people that are interviewed in the doc, one of the things that's always interesting to me, and you do this a little bit in both of yours that I've watched, in both Action and Facing Nolan, I don't think people realize who is asking the question that is being answered by the interviewee. Right. And is that always you?
On this movie, it was probably 80% me and 20% this guy, David Check, who used to work for Major League Baseball films. There were a couple of relationships that Dave had that were like he knew the guy really, like he knew Rod Carew really well.
Oh, okay.
And so he's like I want to do the Rod Carew one. I was like, great. I don't have to prepare for it. That's great. And then there was one trip that I just could not physically go on. I was out of it pretty much. I was
out of commission.
I was out of commission for a couple of days, and so he interviewed Pudge Rodriguez and a couple other guys on a trip, and it's great to have somebody like that who can essentially, I mean, he was essentially like the closer. You know, like if we're doing a pitching metaphor, like I guess for the interviews, I'm the starter and I go 8 innings and, or 7 innings. And then Dave was the closer and, he shuts him down for the last 2 innings. But it was great to have somebody, because like I'm a baseball fan, but this guy is a baseball super fan. Right. Like he can sit down with these guys, these old school guys, and talk to them about the 1978 season where there was a strike that happened, and you remember when you faced this guy and the bottom Thurman Munson or whatever, And I'm just like, yo, I wasn't even born then, but
yeah, he has that knowledge.
He has that knowledge, and so that's really helpful to have. So yeah.
And I guess when you're doing so I obviously am interviewing you right now, right? So I had like a list of questions that we were going to hit on, and then there's stuff that comes up that I end up off the top just asking questions about. Yeah. How much of it is prepared, like here are the points we want to hit, versus like when do you know to just let a guy go and tell you their story based on what they want to tell you versus what you thought you wanted them to tell you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would have a huge list of questions for everybody.
And it just varies person to person, I assume.
Yeah, there are guys, again, like George Brett, who, like, if that guy's cooking, you don't slow him down.
Oh, hell no.
And then there are guys that need you to kind of, like,
you got to draw it out of them.
You got to draw them out of them. And I think the other thing, too, with a lot of these, older guys who, like, they're, they haven't played in 20 to 30 years, you want to give them time. Like, you want to let them. So, like, one of the tricks that I learned is, like, when somebody, especially if it's like one of these older guys who's remembering something from 30 years ago, when they stop, when you think they're done answering their question, give them like 5 more seconds. Because 5 times out of 10, they're going to go, and then Nolan did this, and that's the juice. That's the good stuff. Because they're just trying to remember, they got to go back into the vault a little bit.
Yeah, it's a long ass time ago in the case of dude who pitched for 27 freaking years, too.
Yeah.
So sitting down with with former President George W. Bush, was that the biggest interview you've done in terms of status?
Yeah.
The biggest interview you've ever done?
Oh, yeah, hands down. I mean...
How much intensity was that? I mean, how nervous were you for that?
I wasn't as nervous as I thought I would be because he's always reminded me of my own dad. He looks like my dad. He sounds like my dad. But the weird thing was, and I said this at the premiere at South by, the second he sat down and we started talking, I couldn't get Will Ferrell out of my head.
Because of his
SNL impression. So, like, he kind of did one of those, like, like laughs, like early on. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to think about Will Ferrell. But it kind of like humanized him a little bit. And George W. Bush is like, he's a guy. I mean, obviously he's not a guy. He's the president for 8 years. So he's not a guy. But I think that's part of his charm is that, like, he's a guy.
Right. He's in terms of presidents that can come have everyman status.
Yes.
George is certainly one of them in American history that you think of as think of as a guy that you could sit down and have a beer with and talk about Nolan Ryan.
Talk about baseball. Exactly. And so, you know, it was definitely one of those, like, it was cool too because he was the only person that we had to send the questions to ahead of time, which of course.
And have them approved.
And they even cut a couple out, which totally made sense. There was like a couple of questions where like it was clear like he didn't know what I was gonna like. He's like, I don't have an answer for this.
Right.
But there was
more than anything, it's him not wasting your time with those questions.
There was one moment that I love this moment because we use it in the movie, and I knew I wanted it. I wanted to transition into the Mets somehow. And because I wanted to introduce George W. Bush early in the movie, just to be like, oh, look, we got W, this is cool. But most people are like, he doesn't really impact Nolan's life until the end of his career at the Rangers. So I was like, how do I get W in the movie early in a way that makes sense and doesn't feel forced? And then it hit me like W's like his old, like in his family lineage, one of the people, like I think his great uncle like used to co-own the Mets. And so I wrote that down in my questions and his handlers cut it because I think they were just like, well, George W. doesn't know anything about the Mets from the 60s. And I just added it back in my head. And I asked him, I go, yeah, tell me about your family's history with the Mets. And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, no. Like your uncle used to own the Mets, and I was kind of like giving him the eye of like, dude, I need something here. And he goes, all right, let me see if I can help you with this. He knew what I wanted, and he just like, so what's funny about my family history is my uncle used to own the Mets, and back in the day they had a young flame-throwing pitcher named Nolan Ryan. And I go,
and that's
exactly what I need, and it's in the movie. It provides that transition piece. And I like to think I directed George W. right there.
That's an incredible moment for you in your career.
He knew what I wanted, and he gave it. I was like, "Oh, you're sharp.
What a guy!
You used to be president."
Since I was lucky enough to catch the documentary out at South by Southwest, it's been acquired by Utopia.
Yes.
Now, what does that entail?
So that entails they're a really cutting edge distribution company, and they want to put this movie out in a unique way as widely as possible. And so what they are doing, which I'm so excited about, is they are partnering with Fathom Events, and they are putting this out on 800 plus theaters for one night only.
May 24th.
May 24th. And which makes sense, like theaters are old school, Nolan's old school. And I think we want to make this an event because every time Nolan pitched, it was an event. They would talk about, especially with the Angels and the Astros, like when Nolan pitched, they sold 10,000 more tickets every game because you didn't know if he was what was he going to do.
Yeah.
And so they're putting this thing out on 800 plus theaters, May 24th. If you go to fathomevents.com or facingnolan.com, type in your zip code, and there's going to be a theater there for you.
And you can find the closest one.
You can find the closest one. And so the hope is that this does really well and we get more, like Fathom would do an encore screening, which I think they're going to do. Hopefully they'll do. And so there will likely be another opportunity for you to see it in theaters maybe 2 weeks after May 24th.
Well, I got to say, I rarely, I don't think I've ever watched a documentary in theaters before getting to see this one at South by, and it was an awesome experience.
Yeah.
I should add that in part because Nolan was sitting like 12 feet from me,
right?
Which was surreal. I feel like I spent a lot of time looking at the screen and then looking over at the back of his head like, can I get a feel for how he likes this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But his whole family was there and everything, so it was just an incredible experience for me. But I could not more highly recommend going to see this thing in theaters, especially if you are a big fan, not just baseball, I think of sport in general. It is a really unique story about a guy who did things that nobody else has done and nobody else will ever do. And that's the part that's crazy. He's one of maybe, 10 dudes in the sports that I follow, basketball, baseball, football, that has records that will never be broken, that there's no chance in hell, that the game has changed so much since he did his thing that there's not even an opportunity. Like they wouldn't let you try to do what he's done.
Yeah.
Which just made it all the more cool. Now, another thing I saw through social media is that you got to screen Facing Nolan at the Rangers Stadium Was it after a game?
It's after a game.
So just up on the big screen.
Yeah, that was the most surreal experience I think of my entire life. Because one, it was a Sunday day game versus the Atlanta Braves. So it's the team that won the World Series last year, unfortunately, versus the Rangers on a Sunday at 1:30 in the afternoon. It was the first sellout game that stadium, Globe Life Field, has ever seen in the 16, 17 months they've been open. 40,000 people were there. They asked me to throw out the first pitch. I did. I almost blacked out. I made it over the plate. I didn't throw a strike.
You did it from the rubber.
I did it from the rubber.
Very important note. A lot of people take the easy way out. They walk up 5 steps in front of the mound or whatever. You did it from the rubber, and you perfectly executed like the Nolan Ryan arm hang into his motion and everything, man. It was amazing.
Well, I wouldn't say perfectly executed.
Well, as perfectly as I could see you do it.
Yeah. Hopefully, maybe we can. I know there was a videographer there. I haven't seen the video yet. I don't know if I want to see the video, but that was
a lot of pressure.
That was literally surreal because it was like I'm walking through the tunnels and I'm like, because normally I've been to games where I've seen the first pitch and like not many people are in the stands. It's like for a lot of baseball games, people don't get to the stadium until like the first or second inning. So it's like if this and most baseball games don't sell out,
right?
And so it was like. Yeah, it's like there's going to be 20,000 people at the game, but only 10,000 people watch you throw in the first pitch. Well, first of all, 10,000 people is so many people. Yeah. And I'm walking through the bowels of the stadium with the Rangers PR people, and I'm like, yeah, well, so there's probably only going to be like 20,000 people watching me do this. And the guy looks back and goes, try 35,000. And I'm like, what? I've been in the bowels of the stadium for the last 30 minutes.
So you don't have a clue.
I have no idea. They told me it was going to be a big crowd, but I thought most people aren't going to get there until second inning. But it's a Sunday day game. It's 1:30, and the first 15,000 people got a Nolan Ryan autographed baseball rubber or whatever, a pitching mound.
Oh, sick.
And so I was like, oh, no. But yeah, I made it over the plate. It was low and outside, but I made it over the plate.
You got it there. That's all that matters,
I got it there.
really.
I did the leg kick.
You just want to end up not looking like 50 Cent or one of the all-time terrible first pitches, right? And there's a lot of them.
Well, and the funny thing is not to throw shade at Nolan because he's an iconic guy, but I afterwards I saw him and I shook his hand and I go, I hope I didn't embarrass you. I hope I made you proud. And he goes, well, you couldn't have done it any worse than I did the last time I threw. Which if you YouTube him throwing out the first pitch to Craig Biggio like 5 or 6 years ago, he kind of let it sail.
Okay.
But also he's 70 years old at the time, and I bet his arm is like a crusty old war veteran. Just like he can't throw. I mean,
just nothing but scar tissue in that shoulder at this point.
Anyways, so. But no, yeah, we got to watch the game up with the Ryan family. It was a great game. The Rangers won, and then after the movie ended, they showed right when the game ended, they showed the final inning of Nolan's 7th no-hitter on the Jumbotron, and then they had a Q&A on the field with me, Nolan, Reed Ryan, and then the announcer for the Rangers, Chuck Morgan, and it was the most, and probably 15,000 people stuck around.
Damn.
And I didn't know I was doing this Q&A until the day of. I thought it was just going to be Nolan.
Not a lot of mental prep time,
which was great, honestly.
Made it easier.
It made it easier, and so I'm just literally sitting we made shirts for the movie, like these like facing Nolan shirts, which I need to send you one. They're
Gonna need one.
And I wore it just to like promote the movie, and I look like a homeless person on stage because like Nolan's in a suit, his son's in a suit, the announcer's looking really good, and I'm just like, I feel like, do I look like a 25-year-old kid who
just
like
wandered out here?
And I'm not 25, by the way. I'm 37, but like I feel like I looked very young compared, and I'm dressed like a little college student or
little
whatever.
Baseball fan.
Yeah, exactly. Hi, Nolan.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was, and then they showed the movie on the Jumbotron. I think like 8,000 or 9,000 people stuck around, and it was amazing. And like when the Robin Ventura fight happens in the movie, like everybody just started whooping and hollering, and I was like, this is the coolest experience of my life.
Yeah, get to see the reaction from that many people in the stadium, and obviously a pretty full circle moment from you coming up with the idea to do the doc on Nolan, to walking through the bowels of the stadium that he walked through, to going out on the mound. You know what I mean? Or I guess that stadium didn't exist yet.
No, that stadium didn't exist. But it's I like the metaphor.
Concept.
Yes, the concept of it. No, totally. It was definitely one of those. As a filmmaker, those are the moments that you dream of. And it didn't disappoint. So it was really, really cool. And definitely a bucket list moment.
So it sounds like all in all, the project lived up to your expectations.
Yeah. I mean, we were in that first pitch meeting, we told them that we wanted to premiere at South by Southwest 2022. And in the back of my mind, I go, there's no way we can have the movie done that quickly. But kudos to first of all, kudos to the Ryan family for helping us get it there, and then the unsung hero in any especially a documentary, is the editor. And so our editor Eric McMichael is just an absolute wizard, and he just, I mean, I couldn't have asked for somebody to help sift through that much material and that many interviews and pick the right moments to get the movie to look the way it does and feel the way it does. And so shout out to Eric. The editors of documentaries are the unsung heroes. They're like the offensive line of the documentary space.
So what is next for you in terms of, have you picked your next project?
Yeah, so I right now my another partner in crime in the documentary space, this guy named Luke Coram. He directed the action series that we did for Showtime about sports gambling.
Cool.
He and I are in the midst of making the feature documentary about Milli Vanilli.
Milli Vanilli.
The Milli Vanilli scandal from the 90s. If you don't know about it, look it up. It's the craziest thing in the world. I don't know how much you know about it.
I know that, like, a very limited amount. It's like the surface level story, right? I know that Milli Vanilli at some point got in trouble for like misrepresenting themselves as a band, I guess it was. Singing group.
They lip synced.
They were lip syncing,
but not just live. Their voices on the record. So they sold over. Let me see here. They sold over 10 million records. Their debut album was the biggest debut since, I think, Elvis Presley. Their debut album sold more than Michael Jackson's debut, sold more than Whitney Houston's debut. They had 4 number 1 hit singles: "Blame It on the Rain," "Girl You Know It's True." I mean, iconic, fun 90s pop songs. And then you learned after about 2 years of them being the most famous band in the world that they were frauds. But what most people don't know is that there's a man behind the curtain, this evil super producer named Frank Farian, who orchestrated the whole thing and got away with it scot-free. And he had done this before with another group in the 70s. And like, so it was just, it's this wild story of greed and ambition and pop music and smoke and mirrors
and scandal,
and scandal and celebrity. And so we're about a year-ish into making that, and hopefully it'll be out around this time next year somewhere.
So you've already been working on that before Facing Nolan even comes out.
Yes, yeah.
Sounds busy.
Yeah, and then the other fun thing, I'm writing a screenplay for Imagine Entertainment, Ron Howard and Brian Grazer's company, and
I'm familiar. Yeah,
it's a sports comedy. Imagine. Remember the '90s sports comedy for kids, like the Little Big League or Angels in the Outfield or whatever. I'm trying to bring those back. Big Green. And I'm trying to bring those back. So I'm writing a script called Airball. And it's essentially like School of Rock meets Moneyball, but for kids. So it's like a super elite STEM school. And imagine LeBron James's kid is like in middle school, gets sent to that school. And the basketball team has to implement this kind of Moneyball system, like Daryl Morey Moneyball system to like compete.
Right.
And then they start winning games and all this stuff. So
That'll be fun.
Yeah. So I'm working on that. I probably should be working on that right now, but
I'll get you out of here as soon as I can.
Yeah. No, all good. But it's weirdly I'm either dabbling with some '90s nostalgia with Nolan or Milli Vanilli, or I'm in the sports space. So I can't complain. Those are all fun spaces to live.
Absolutely. I've often said that this is the last 20 years have been this new golden age of television where, we're at the point right now where there are so many must-watch shows that I'm just like, I don't even know. I'm going to be working on getting through this list for the next 40 freaking years.
I know.
And then obviously in the last, I would argue, 5 years, 10 years even, we've sort of hit like what I've seen as more of a golden age of documentaries as well.
Yes.
Yes, that's good timing for you.
Great timing. And I really think, I think Netflix had a big thing to do with it. There's a series called Chef's Table that I think was the first true doc series as we know it. And I feel like without Chef's Table, I don't think we have this
all
golden
these
age.
Different stories.
Yeah, because I think people are down to watch these documentary stories told over 8 hours, 6 hours, or whatever. And they can be little one-offs here and there, or they can be, I feel like it was Chef's Table, and you remember I think it was The Jinx.
Yeah, dude.
On HBO. Those two, both hit, I feel like, kind of in the same timeline, and people are like, oh. And plus, you can make documentaries for so much cheaper.
Right.
Like if you're going to make 6 hours of content for HBO and it's scripted, that's going to be $100 million.
Right.
If you're going to make 6 hours unscripted for HBO, it's going to be like $5 million. And sometimes they get the same ratings.
And sometimes the story is better told through a documentary than it is through like a fiction added,
Exactly.
It's what makes Winning Time really impressive to me is I'm like, I can't believe I love this. Like the fact that it's as good as it is and as entertaining as it is, even though it's really pissing off Jerry West, is crazy to me because like on paper, that story, I knew a lot of it. So me watching it play out on screen shouldn't be as fun as it is, but it is. To your point, it's interesting to me that some stories are more fitting for a documentary than they are for like fictionalizing it and trying to turn it into some dramedy thing.
Have you seen, I haven't watched it yet, but have you seen the Magic Johnson documentary?
No, I'm not watching that shit.
Okay, why not? I'm just curious. I haven't watched it yet.
Because that documentary to me is just Magic and his camp trying to provide some counter to Winning Time and what is more of like a salacious story, right? And I get that. They want to preserve Magic's reputation as much as they can. But as it's been explained to me, the documentary on Apple TV Plus is just the Lakers skipping to the championship every year, and in between Magic loves his wife. And that's not really the real story comparative to what people are aware of, right?
Okay.
So
I haven't watched either. I've watched the pilot for Winning Time, and I loved it. But again, I just had a child, and
congratulations, by the way, on the newborn.
Thank you so much. But yeah, so I haven't. I want to watch both. Like I love Magic Johnson. I love
don't
Adam
get me wrong.
McKay.
It's likely I watch it at some point just to see the footage of Magic in his heyday and his prime, because that's not something I've gotten to enjoy as much as people who are older than us, 10, 15 years older than you and I.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, there's just an incredible amount of great stories to consume right now.
Yeah.
And it makes me very happy as somebody who's obsessed with consuming.
What's crazy too is, have you heard about The Staircase?
I just saw the trailer.
Yeah. That was based on actually, if you want to go back to the original docuseries, the Staircase docuseries, which if you haven't seen
watched it.
It's awesome.
It is.
But they were making that for years back in the 90s and 2000s, because that story's so old.
Right.
And it's so befitting that actually might have been the original first docuseries, true crime docuseries. And now it's being turned into a big prestige TV, Colin Firth, HBO kind of a thing.
Entertainment deal.
Yeah, I know. I love it. It's great. It's a great time to be a filmmaker. It's really hard, obviously, because I think, I went and saw, my wife and I went and saw Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Haven't seen it yet, really want to.
Unbelievable. It's so good, and I'm so glad it's getting successful, because I'm like, that's the kind of movie that I feel like we're missing, like the really bold original vision, but it involves the multiverse somehow.
Yeah.
So it's like the one area I wish would level out a little bit more in the film space is the big theatrical movies. I wish they weren't all. I love a Marvel movie. I'll see them. I'll see Doctor Strange. I love Spider-Man, but I wish we had more Everything Everywhere All at Once is.
For sure. And I think there will be a balance at some point. That's a balance that gets struck. That's a little more to your liking, because we just went way too far in that direction where it was like everything was Marvel for 5 years.
I know.
But there has been more and more. And just to throw out another show that currently is, I just finished it and it's still blowing my mind.
Yeah.
Severance on Apple TV Plus.
Oh yeah, we finished that the other day too.
Oh my God. Like, so to speak of originality, like I just never seen that angle taken before. I've never seen anybody do anything like that.
Yeah.
And then to have the director be Ben Stiller.
Ben Stiller, which if you didn't surprise me as much. Did you see his Showtime series?
No.
Escape from Dannemora?
See, I didn't know he had
You
this
probably
in
don't
it.
even know what Escape. Nobody watched it, but it was like Ben Stiller directed every episode. Paul Dano, Benicio del Toro, Patricia Arquette.
What the fuck?
It's awesome. It's on Showtime, Escape from Dannemora. And it's a 7-episode miniseries about this true prison escape from the 2000s, I think. And Patricia Arquette is incredible in it, just as she is in Severance. But she's so different. Like, my wife and I were watching Severance, and I'm like, I am so scared of her.
Oh, she's terrifying.
She's terrifying. And she's also terrifying in Escape from Dannemora, but she's a real person, and she's like different. And so I'm like, are we in the Patricia Arquette-essence right now? I think we are. We need to start. We had the McConaissance, and now we're in the Arquette-essence. Yeah. And it could be the David Arquette-essence, because he was great in Scream.
Absolutely.
He's great. The new Scream, he's great in.
Talented family.
Yeah.
Bradley, thank you so much for taking the time today. Where can we follow you on social media to keep up with your projects and the releases?
Yeah, you can. I'm on Twitter at Bradley Jackson, I think.
It's easy to remember.
Okay. I might be wrong. I actually don't know what my Twitter is.
I'll double check you right now.
Yeah. And then I'm on Instagram at Bradley H. Jackson.
At Bradley Jackson on Twitter is correct.
Yeah. And then at Bradley H. Jackson on Instagram. And then, Facing Nolan, we have a Twitter page. We have an Instagram page. If you literally go to facingnolan.com right now, it takes you to where you can buy tickets to see
for the
movie.
May 24th screening.
May 24th at 7 o'clock all over it's every showtime's at 7. So whether you live in Montana, whether you live in Houston, Texas, whether you live in New York, you will find a theater within 10 miles of you that you can see this movie at. And it would really like help the film get it to a wider audience, because we are hopefully going to get this on streaming one of these days, but obviously if it does really well in theaters, that helps our case.
So that's it's
a whole separate, I mean, we could get
world entirely, huh?
Yeah. The hope is too, we get to show it at some more stadiums. Like,
that would be sick.
We'd love to show it. Like, there's some talks of showing it at the Baseball Hall of Fame, Cooperstown. So, I think there's a really fun life cycle for this movie. But a lot of people are hoping if it does really well on May 24th, I think that helps our case.
Bradley, thank you again.
Of course.
Everybody go to facingnolan.com right now. Grab yourself tickets to the May 24th showing that is closest to you.
Yeah.
And enjoy. We'll talk again soon, man.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Talkspace. It is spring cleaning season. Time to get out the old and make room for the new. And there's something rejuvenating about getting down to what's essential and starting fresh. The same goes with your mind. Over the years, thoughts and emotions can build up. That's why it's important to talk to someone who's trained to help you declutter your mental space. Talkspace therapists are available to message anytime you need, because you shouldn't have to wait and watch your thoughts pile up until your next appointment rolls around. I've been in therapy for over a decade now. It's one of the most essential, important, and effective pieces of my life. And taking the first steps toward getting help can be scary. I know that. It can be difficult, but no matter where you are in your mental health journey, talking to a therapist who's trained to help makes an enormous difference. Talkspace takes some of the pressure off that first step. It's a more flexible, convenient, and affordable way to get high-quality care. Once you match with one of their licensed therapists, you can message them anytime through the app or schedule a live session if you need some FaceTime. If thoughts and emotions are piling up for you, a fresh perspective can help you feel much, much, much better. Match with your dedicated therapist today at Talkspace.com and use promo code RBP during sign-up to get $100 off your first month. That's $100 off at Talkspace.com, promo code RBP. What are you waiting for? Go now. Talkspace.com, promo code RBP for $100 off. By the way, if you're looking for official RBP merch, it's available in only one place, bolenmedia.com/shop. And if you want to support our show even more directly in exchange for ad-free Friday episodes and more content, Patreon.com/Ross Bolen Podcast is the place. When you join, you immediately gain access to our entire backlog of premium episodes on Patreon, and you'll find a 10% off code for merch on bolenmedia.com/shop to thank you for your pledge to be a part of the RBP gang that keeps this podcast showing and growing. So go today, patreon.com/Ross Bolen Podcast, and immediately gain access to our entire backlog of premium ad-free episodes. We drop one every Friday. We got one coming this Friday. Promise you, it's worth it, and we appreciate your support oh so much. Speaking of which, follow us on social media. We're on TikTok at The Ross Bolen Podcast. We are on Instagram at The Ross Bolen Podcast. Twitter at Ross Bolen Pod. You can follow Jared at Jared Borislow on Twitter and Instagram. Also check out his F1 show, Formula Bone, wherever podcasts are played. The Formula Bone F1 show has a new episode coming out to cover the Miami race that just took place over the weekend. And of course, Formula Bone is also on all the social media platforms at Formula Bone. Make sure you follow it there. Thank you for listening. Tell your friends and family about our show and all the Bolen Media podcasts. Jared and I will be back on Wednesday. Until next time, peace be with you, and also with you.